petroleum.
You've been listening to President Trump. He's hosting oil executives, and it's an extraordinary event at the White House because you really are sort of watching the change of history. We have first the arrest of Maduro the other day, and now the question of what's going to happen to the oil and gas business in Venezuela. It doesn't come, though, without risk. I mean, we have not yet heard from the people of Venezuela, and, of course, there's a very uncertain government with a president who's a protege of President Maduro, or former President Maduro, assuming he was ever really even legally president. Now, this comes as earlier today, a significant event happened. U.S. forces boarded another sanctioned oil tanker. National security correspondent Carla Babb has the latest. Carla?
Hey, Greta, the U.S. Coast Guard, along with Marines and sailors, launched from the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, seizing the sanctioned oil tanker Olena in the Caribbean Sea. The U.S. Coast Guard boarded the vessel, previously known as the Minerva M, that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem called a ghost fleet tanker. The tanker was in international waters and was suspected of carrying illicit oil. The U.S., EU, and U.K., Greta, had all sanctioned the Olena for transporting Russian oil in violation of earlier restrictions. U.S. Southern Command posting in a statement on X, quote, once again, our joint interagency forces sent a clear message this morning. There is no safe haven for criminals. The USS Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group assisted with the assault, according to U.S. Southern Command. The move just 2 days after the U.S. seized another tanker in the Caribbean, the Sophia, which was carrying illicit oil, and the Marinera, formerly and more commonly known as the Bella One, in the northern Atlantic. That ship running from the Coast Guard, even changing its flag and painting a new name on the hull, which Noem called a desperate and failed attempt to escape justice. So, Greta, that's now 5 sanctioned oil tankers seized by the U.S. since December 10th. And officials warning more could happen soon. A U.S. official telling me a U.S. destroyer is following a group of at least 4 sanctioned oil tankers running from the vicinity of Venezuela, heading east in the Atlantic. And Greta, no surprise here, at least one of those has changed its name and flagged itself as a Russian vessel.
Carla Babb, thank you. Venezuelan-born journalist Maria Alesia Sosa joins me. Thank you for joining me again. And the dust hasn't completely settled. We're only like a week into Maduro being seized by the United States. You make phone calls back and forth to your home country. Tell me, what's the thinking generally, if there is such a thing as a general thinking in Venezuela, about what has happened?
Hi, Greta. Thank you for having me again. As I told you before, but now I want to reiterate this. We are overjoyed that Maduro is gone, but we carry, in a sense, the weight of 25 years of suffering. So we are cautiously optimistic. Listen, there is a lot of uncertainty still and fear right now in the streets in Caracas. This is mixed with a pure joy of seeing Maduro removed. But we want to trust this process. We also know it may take time. We want it to be quick and very quick, yeah. But we have waited 25 years for this moment.
You know, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone in Venezuela, and they hear the United States coming from the White House questions about what the United States is going to do with the prize resource there, which is oil. I mean, it's a prized resource the entire world. Do the people of Venezuela, at least the people you know, do they trust that the United States is going to be fair to them? Because they've had 25 years of rather incredible, catastrophic government.
Let me tell you, I see that we are moving from an oil industry run like a criminal cartel to one run by legitimate capital and global standards. We are watching this meeting between the administration and all the CEOs of top American oil companies with high expectations. Seeing this, legitimate companies at the tables give us real hope and optimism. As one of the men that were there just said, he was Venezuelan, he's really optimistic. And we must remember that for years, the Chavismo didn't treat oil as a business. They treated it as a weapon against the opposition, against the population. So transitioning from this criminal enterprise back to a serious and legit business industry is exactly what Venezuela needs to recover. But also, I should say, the White House must be cautious, must be careful, because Chavismo has always used time as a weapon. They have tricked past administrations, Democrats, Republicans, international mediators that have tried to find a solution for our crisis. They are experts in deception. So my message to President Trump is, don't let them play you. Just yesterday, we saw that Jorge Rodriguez, one of the regime operators, said he promised they would release a large number of political prisoners as a gesture of good faith, as for the new face to the U.S. But listen, right now, they have only released less than a dozen people out of 1,000. So that is barely 1% of the political prisoners. They told Trump and Rubio they would do it, but it's a lie. They are playing a shell game with the United States. So we really urge the Trump administration to demand the immediate release of these innocent Venezuelans, because that would really be a huge step. And also it's part of the guarantees that these oil companies will need to operate in Venezuela.
Well, there's a lot to watch in next week. Ms. Machado's coming to the White House. Another topic I wanted to come back to talk about that nobody's really talking about. I mean, this initial thing was on an indictment picking up Maduro, but and now today oil. But you know that it does seem that Venezuela and its cartels has been the epicenter of incredible human trafficking. And I hope you come back and we can have a conversation about that. Maria, Alesia,
thank you so much
always,
for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming up, chaos. First a shooting in Minnesota involving federal agents, and now a second shooting involving federal agents, this time Oregon. The latest when the record continues.
O'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Like a relentless weed, moderate to severe ulcerative colitis symptoms can keep coming back. Break away to what's possible with Tremfya, with rapid relief at 4 weeks. Many people experienced remission at 1 and even 2 years. Some saw 100% visible healing of their intestinal lining. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Healing is possible with Tremfya. Tremfya now offers self-administration from the start. Ask your doctor about Tremfya today.
A new year brings new threats, and Cyberman's ready for every one of them. While hackers plot their next move, Cyberman's already there, protecting families, businesses, and governments before danger can strike. This year, protect what matters most with easy-to-use, award-winning protection. With PCmatic, you get American-made protection that's faster, smarter, and stronger. Start 2026 with confidence. Visit PCmatic.com today.
You know, waking up in the hospital from all that stuff, there's got to be some kind of purpose for me here. I need to get over myself and start helping others. Total Towers came in and gave me and my family a home. I've regained quite a bit of independence from that amazing gift they've given me. I can't begin to thank Total Towers for everything they've done for our family. It means so much to us, a life-changing gift. Thank you. Please donate $11 a month at t2t.org.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work. Try to see a doctor this week or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Order online and save $45. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. Visit urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS. That's urgentcarekit.com/news, promo code NEWS.
There are only a few men I'd trust with my life. Two of them built this wallet. I've known the guys behind Proof for nearly 20 years, and we've been through hell and back together. When they told me they were building the wallet, I just said, build me now, I'm in. This isn't some fashion piece. This isn't just some trend. These wallets are a direct reflection of the kind of men who built it. It's built to last, built to function, and designed to carry everything you need and more. If anything happens to it, they'll take care of it. No questions, no fine print. If you knew the guys who created this wallet, you wouldn't carry anything else. Go check them out, because they built this thing right.
Yesterday, the Senate voted to restrict the president's use of military force in Venezuela unless Congress gives prior approval. But does he actually legally need prior approval? The Senate vote yesterday was 52 to 47. 5 Republicans joined all 47 Democrats. The 5 Republicans were Maine's Susan Collins, Missouri's Josh Hawley, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, Indiana's Todd Young, and Kentucky's Rand Paul. President Trump then responded to those Republicans saying they should never be elected to office again, adding, quote, in any event, and despite their stupidity, the War Powers Act is unconstitutional, totally violating Article 2 of the Constitution, as all presidents and their departments of justice have determined before me, end quote. Now, a full Senate vote is expected next week, and the House would also need to pass the bill, and then the president's signature would be needed. And if the president were to veto it at that point, Congress would have the option to vote to override the veto and make it law. Overriding the presidential veto, though, is a very heavy lift. It requires 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate. Now, the Trump administration didn't notify Congress before Nicolas Maduro's capture. The administration says it wanted to avoid leaks. The Constitution says only Congress has the power to declare war. And the last time Congress declared war was in 1942. And of course, we've had many military actions since 1942 without a congressional declaration of war. We've had Korea, Vietnam, Panama, Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, and more. But in 1973, amid the Vietnam War, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution. At the time, then President Richard Nixon vetoed the measure. He said it was unconstitutional and dangerous. But then Congress did override Nixon's veto, making it law. So what does the War Powers Act require? That a president consult with Congress before committing forces into armed conflict abroad. But there is an exception, allowing for a president to commit forces without prior approval from Congress, but then the president must notify Congress within 48 hours. As an aside, 2026 is a long way from 1973, and the whole world knew about Trump's military-ordered action within almost minutes of Maduro's capture, which, of course, was well within the 48-hour window, but it's not an official notice to Congress. Many presidents since the War Powers Act was enacted have committed troops without congressional approval, and many of those presidents were criticized by members of Congress for not getting prior approval. Examples include President Obama committed forces to a no-fly zone in Libya in 2011 without congressional approval. And then 2021 and then again in 2024, President Joe Biden authorized military strikes in Syria and Iraq without congressional approval. Now, another argument that President Trump has made invokes the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, President James Monroe, in his State of the Union, warned European powers not to interfere in Western Hemisphere affairs. President John F. Kennedy cited the Monroe Doctrine in 1962 when asked about the crisis surrounding Cuba.
The Monroe Doctrine means what it has meant since the President Monroe and John Quincy Adams enunciated, and that is that we would oppose a foreign power extending its power to the Western Hemisphere, and that's why we oppose what is happening in Cuba today. That's why we have cut off our trade. That's why we worked in the OAS and in other ways to isolate the communist menace in Cuba.
Professor Emeritus of Harvard University, Alan Dershowiz, joins me. Good afternoon, sir. And is what President Trump did in committing the military action in Venezuela against the law or not?
Of course not. And the best precedent would be President Obama sending in special forces to kill, not capture, Osama bin Laden. He didn't seek any prior authorization for that. He was invading a foreign country without the approval of the foreign country, Pakistan, and that was a one-off. And the capture the other day in Venezuela was also a one-off. So as to that issue, there's no dispute. There's nothing in the Constitution that requires prior notice or anything that would limit executive action. Prior notice is a terrible idea in a Congress that's leaking like a sieve. I don't think this military action could have been taken as successfully, or the successful action against Osama bin Laden could have been taken successfully if there was prior notice. Now, that's very different from we're running Venezuela now and a kind of claim of military occupation, a continuing military occupation of a country. That would be very, very different. But we don't know what's going on. We don't know whether or not the president is doing any more than threatening at this point, and threatening is certainly within the prerogative of Article 2 power of the president. So at the moment, the president has done nothing to violate either the Constitution or the War Powers Act, even if the War Powers Act is constitutional. And the War Powers Act, to the extent that it constrains the president's Article 2 authority, has some very serious constitutional limitations.
The Supreme Court's never ruled whether it's constitutional or not. Nobody's ever done anything. The Supreme Court's always thought this is a political question, and Congress should decide about this act and not the president. But what I find sort of interesting is that 48-hour requirement. That was at a time in 1973 when military actions could be kept relatively secret. Now we learned almost as it was happening. So Congress knew about it right from the get-go. But is that notice?
Of course, that's notice in every realistic sense of the term. Look, when a president can, without in any way jeopardizing a military operation, notify the leaders of Congress, there's a designated group, he ought to do it just to get more support. But in our age of extraordinary partisanship, he's not going to get that support. If two presidents do exactly the same. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you tell me what war is? I mean, the Constitution says Congress has the right, has the obligation, the authority to declare war. What is war compared to these military actions?
Well, obviously, there have been rulings by the Justice Department saying that declarations of war are not required for even military actions as extensive as Vietnam. There was no real authorization, the Gulf of Tonkin resolutions and all of that. But we have fought massive wars without declaring war. I think the very concept of declaring war is an anachronism, as you said. The last time we did it was, I think, against Romania after the attack by the Japanese Air Force on Pearl Harbor. But since that time, we have fought multiple wars, both Democrats and Republican presidents, particularly Lyndon Johnson and John Kennedy, without declarations of war.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, protests in Minneapolis. We have a report from the scene when the record continues.
Newsmax.
Shoots it straight.
No talking down to me.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
I trust Newsmax.
Newsmax.
They don't tell me how to think. They let me decide.
Real news for real people.
Lara Logan here with some news for you. Men's testosterone levels today are roughly half of what they were 50 years ago. And after the age of 30, testosterone drops around 1% every year. Chalk's Male Vitality Supplements may be the answer for you. They contain ingredients clinically proven to boost natural testosterone production. Go to chalk.com and use code TV to get a huge discount. Or call or text the number on your screen today.
Don't kibble your dog.
Oh, hey, Dr. Marty.
Hey, Matt.
But what's wrong with this? It's premium stuff.
Let's check it out. It's still kibble, which means it's ultra-processed at extremely high temperatures that destroy the nutrients in the food. But at Dr. Marty, we gently freeze-dried premium meats, fruits, and vegetables, locking in their nutrients.
Never kibbled.
You got it, kid, and they're gonna love it.
Muscle cramps were keeping me up at night, so then I tried Slowmag, the magnesium plus calcium supplement that helps relax tense muscles so I can rest comfortably. And Slowmag tablets have a slow-release formula that's gentle on my stomach. That's why I use Slowmag.
Every day across the globe, millions of Big business agendas go unseen by investors. Things that go against your core values and beliefs. It's time to know your investments. Abortion, alternative lifestyles, gender and identity confusion. If you believe in protecting marriage and life, children, innocence, guarding masculinity, restoring families, defending religious liberty, invest with your values. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, the 91-year-old formulator of Immuno 150, an incredible nutritional supplement. There's nothing like it. Now, Immuno 150 is different because it contains 70 plant-derived minerals and 80 other nutrients. Dr. Linus Pauling, known for vitamin C, was instrumental in convincing me to get into the mineral business in 1983. He said the world is sick due to a lack of minerals in topsoil. He said the body needs 60 minerals, but the average food and supplement has no more than 12. That's the reason for Immuno 150. Since its inception, it's had a powerful impact on the lives of thousands of people who could not get any help from various supplements they took or their doctor. Now, I suggest you try Immuno 150 to see what 70 minerals, CoQ10, and 80 nutrients can do for you. Look at the videos on our website. Millions have. Now, consider placing an order for Immuno 150 online or call our toll-free number. I know you'll be glad you did.
Today, 2 days after the ICE-involved shooting in Minnesota that killed 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry said this.
We are a safe city. ICE is making it less so. We are a city of unity, but ICE is trying to divide us and tear us apart. Bad for business, bad for safety, bad for unity, bad for democracy, and bad for this republic. We want them out.
Protests are still raging in the streets of Minneapolis. Yesterday, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz authorized the Minnesota National Guard to deploy in support of local law enforcement. Correspondent Joe Moeller is in Minneapolis with the latest. Joe?
Good evening to you. That's right. The National Guard hasn't been deployed just yet. We haven't seen any of the Guard troops out here, but it is another day full of demonstrations. We're outside the federal building south of Minneapolis, just outside of the city, and this is where those demonstrations are continuing here at this hour. We're going to walk just down the streets and give you a look at what's going on. You have federal police out here protecting the building, and now they're putting up more barriers outside. They've got the concrete barriers here, and now they're putting up a fence at the entrance here. This is where the protests have been happening throughout the day and even yesterday. These demonstrators are yelling at the agents as they do return here to this building following their day of continuing this massive immigration crackdown. And throughout the day, we've seen a handful of arrests outside. We've also seen them deploy tear gas several times. You can see the guns in their hands. Those are for the tear gas that they do deploy. They shoot those at the ground, and the tear gas comes out. But throughout the day, the crowd has sort of tried to inch towards the building, and you're taking a look at these demonstrators still yelling at the agents here. There's a couple of YouTubers here as well that you're walking by, and you can see that the crowd here, they get really close to the police. This is Department of Homeland Security police. These are not agents out here. It's the police from the federal building here. And they're here to protect it. We've been watching this protest get bigger throughout the day. Yesterday there were several arrests, and today there were several more arrests as these operations do continue. And in other cities, we've seen these barriers go up. I know in Chicago these barriers went up, and the point of them were to keep the demonstrators behind the barriers, but we haven't seen them move the demonstrators behind them just yet. But tonight, it is Friday night, and these tend to pick up in the other cities on the weekends, and we'll see where this goes tonight. But so far, there have been a handful of arrests here. I know there's other demonstrations happening in Minneapolis, on that street where that shooting unfolded on Wednesday involving that ICE agent. There's a demonstration happening there. And last night, there was demonstrations through the streets of Minneapolis. So they are preparing for even more here today in Minneapolis. Minneapolis outside of this federal building. We'll see what happens. Last night it was raining, so people did end up leaving here, but tonight we'll see here on this Friday night. I know more people will be heading out, and more people are still showing up here. So, Greta, I'll go ahead and send this back to you, as we are getting a whiff of some tear gas here.
Joe Moeller in Minneapolis getting a whiff of tear gas, which is horrible. Anyway, thank you, Joe. Now to Portland, Oregon. That is where protests erupted after United States Border Patrol agents shot 2 people during a traffic stop. According to the Department of Homeland Security spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin, U.S. Border Patrol agents were, quote, conducting a targeted vehicle stop in Portland, Oregon. The passenger of the vehicle and target was a Venezuelan illegal alien affiliated with the transnational Tren de Aragua prostitution ring and involved in a recent shooting in Portland. The vehicle driver is believed to be a member of the vicious Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, when agents identified themselves to the vehicle occupants. The driver weaponized his vehicle and attempted to run over the law enforcement agents. Fearing for his life and safety, an agent fired defensive shots. The driver drove off with the passenger fleeing the scene, end quote. And Oregon Governor Tina Kotek has called for a full and transparent federal investigation. Coming up, Iran's regime teetering on the edge of possible collapse, orders an internet blackout. That when the record continues.
A mesothelioma diagnosis is overwhelming, but you don't have to go through it alone. Our firm is exclusively dedicated to only serving mesothelioma victims and their families. With decades of success, our team of nurses and attorneys will fight for the compensation and care you deserve. We'll even come to you. This is our MesoCare promise. Call us now so you can focus on what matters most.
Call now and we'll come to you for a free consultation. Call 800-600-3850 or go to mesobook.com.
My cell phone bill kept going up. I started looking around, what are our other options? With Consumer Cellular, I'm saving over $50 a month. Same coverage, same data, same talk, same cell phone, simple.
So why am I paying way more for a big wireless plan? What am I getting for my money?
Consumer Cellular gives you the same fast, reliable nationwide network for up to half the cost of big wireless.
Same tower, same coverage.
I feel like people should know that.
They cut my bill just about in half.
I'm saving almost $100 a month.
That's over $1,000 a year.
Not only did I save money, but our coverage was vastly improved. It was fantastic.
There's got to be a catch, and I'm going to find it by going straight to the CEO himself, Ed Evans. What's up, Ed?
Because we serve primarily the 50-plus market today, we know our customers are going to use a lot less data. We can then set our pricing substantially lower than what the big three are able to do on the exact same networks.
Oh, I love that.
My job is to help you save money on wireless, even if you're on an unlimited plan.
My bill with the big carriers was over $300, and with Consumer Cellular, it's about $100.
Our customers ranked us #1 in network coverage satisfaction. And there's no long-term contracts.
When I look at what I had with Verizon, I'm not sure what I was paying extra for.
And yes, you could keep your number, no problem. Want to bring your phone? That's great too. We'll have you wrapped up in about 20 minutes. Really.
We hadn't gone back. We're not going back. We're with Consumer Cellular.
Call now and see how one of our U.S.-based Switch Pros can cut your bill by up to half. That's right, up to half. And when you call right now, you'll get your second month free. Just use the code SECONDFREE. And AARP members save even more. Call 1-800-918-0560. That's 1-800-918-0560.
What if you could invest in the growth of political campaign spending in America? Since Citizens United in 2010, election spending has surged, with the 2026 midterms expected to set new records. Fullpack aims to be one of the first NASDAQ-listed stocks in this industry. NASDAQ has reserved Fullpack the ticker, GOTV. Join top-tier investors and become a GOTV shareholder today. Learn more and buy Fullpack shares before they begin trading at GOTV.com.
It might be happening, the collapse of the Iranian regime that has ruled Iran with an iron fist since 1979. The latest is this. Iranian authorities have imposed a nationwide internet blackout. A blackout. And so the Iranian regime is under intense pressure from protests. They don't want anyone inside or outside Iran to know what's going on in that repressive nation, so they have a blackout. But despite that blackout, anti-regime protests are growing and spreading all across the nation. Middle East correspondent Zach Anders is in Tel Aviv with the very latest. Zach?
It seems like last night was the defining moment, or at least the turning point, if you will, for this protest, Greta. And right now, there's just a lot that we don't know. We can't verify. The Islamic Republic of Iran has gone dark. Now, this is a near complete internet shutdown, nothing in or out, and it's more than 24 hours old now. There were reports of more than 1 million people in the streets last night. That's a huge leap from the night before. The exiled son of the Shah, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, had urged Iranians to make last night the largest demonstration to date, and by all indications, they did just that. Crowds were battling security forces, setting fire to regime buildings, police stations, tax offices, even mosques on fire. And then the internet cut, and that was the last that we saw. Now, protests in more than 100 cities last night, every province in Iran. Prince Pahlavi then urged more people to take to the streets tonight.
Be with your fellow compatriots on Friday night as well. I call on field leaders to try to ensure that groups that have taken to the streets link up with one another so that the crowds become even larger. Well done to all of you who took over the streets across the country on Thursday night. I am proud of every one of you.
Now, regime-run television remains on the air. They're broadcasting an address from Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, directing threats at the United States and warning President Trump that, quote, he too will be brought down. While the Ayatollah reminded Iranians that the Islamic Republic came to power, quote, with the blood of hundreds of thousands. Chilling words. How many people is this regime willing to sacrifice to stay in power this time around? Now, right now, the only information that is making it through the digital blockade, we believe, is coming to us through the use of Starlinks, connecting to the internet via satellite. However, we're now receiving reports that there is GPS disruption in the capital of Tehran and radio interference as well. That might be a sign that the regime is trying to disrupt the ability to connect with Starlink as well. And it is unconfirmed, but there is growing evidence coming to us from Iranian Telegram accounts that the number of those killed in last night's protests nationwide could be far greater than what we are initially reporting or seeing come out of some of these reports that came before the blackout. People are sharing that emergency rooms were overflowing last night, and we even saw some images of bodies laid out in parking lots. It appears that the casualty figures are far more severe, and we're also hearing that state security forces may have suffered significant losses last night as well. And in addition to this, reports of unarmed protesters being gunned down in the streets. It's now day 14 there, early morning hours in Tehran, and the protests, from what we can tell, still going, no signs of slowing down. Greta?
Zach, what provoked this? Why not? There have been other protests in the past, but they've been ruling with an iron fist since '79. Why now?
Yeah, it started with the merchants, the shopkeepers shutting their doors 14 days ago now, and then the students joined in. And this angst and anger against the regime has been simmering for decades, certainly. And we've seen in 2009, again in 2022, serious protests. But at the time, the economic situation, the oil wealth, it wasn't necessarily a dire situation for everyday Iranians. Today, people don't have any money, and so their hate for the regime is doubled by their inability to go out and buy basic goods.
We just lost Zach, but boy, what he is explaining sure mirrors what's going on also in Venezuela with the price and the economy. Anyway, that was Zach Anders overseas. Coming up, is it a bird, is it a plane, or is it a dinosaur? That when the record continues.
You know, folks, I thank God for my wonderful wife, my kids, my country, the greatest nation ever. And Americans like you who believe in the truth, the Chris Salcedo Show will never stop fighting for you.
The Chris Salcedo Show, for the news you need to know. Falls are the #1 cause of injury to senior citizens. Falling down stairs can be disastrous. Acorn Stair Lifts has the solution. Just don't fall. Sit, relax, ride with an Acorn stair lift, the world's leader in stair lifts. That's right, don't let limited mobility keep you from going up and down your stairs, even outside. Call Acorn Stair Lifts now for a free information kit and no obligation quote. Now you can safely ride with your Acorn Stair Lift.
Now I don't have to worry about him climbing those stairs anymore.
And our Acorn Stair Lift was very affordable.
Our Acorn Stair Lift is definitely more affordable than moving.
The Acorn Stair Lift has a padded seat and backrest for maximum comfort. It easily folds up for access to the stairway. 5 safety sensors stop your Acorn Stair Lift if there is something in the way. And it even runs during power outages.
I am king of my castle again.
You'll be working directly with the world's leader in stair lifts. That's right, there's no middleman. Acorn's trained technicians professionally install your stair lift directly to the staircase. In most cases, in 2 hours or less. There's no need for special construction. We don't leave until you're completely comfortable using your Acorn Stair Lift.
Don't risk a serious fall going down the stairs.
I was really surprised at how little it cost.
Call for your free no-obligation information kit and quote from Acorn Stair Lifts. Just don't fall. Safely ride up and down your steps.
Give your life a lift with Acorn Stair Lifts.
Call 1-800-908-4077 right now for your free information kit or visit our website today. That number again is 1-800-908-4077. Call now.
Hi, I'm Ben Cozy. Isn't traveling a pain in the neck? You're cramped, uncomfortable, and forget about getting any rest. There's nothing cozy about airplane seats or hard plastic benches, and those so-called travel pillows, they just don't cut it. You don't need another travel pillow. You need Be Cozy, the world's most comfortable neck pillow. Trapped in the middle seat? Wrap Be Cozy around your neck to stop chin drop, bobblehead napping. Smashed up against the window? Fold Be Cozy over and tuck it onto your shoulder for super side support. Frequent flyer miles got you sitting aisle? Turn Be Cozy to the side for the perfect pillow position. Everyone wants to be cozy, so get the world's most comfortable travel neck pillow and be cozy just like me, Ben Cozy. You get to be cozy. Everyone gets a Be Cozy. Only Be Cozy has patented overlapping arms so you get double support and the comfort you need in any seat on any trip. Go online right now and get this exclusive TV offer. Buy one Be Cozy, get one 50% off. Get yours now.
Total Beats, America's best-selling Beats brand, is available at Walmart. Total Beats blood pressure support soft chews contain a key ingredient clinically shown to deliver 2 times better blood pressure support. Take control of your health. Head to Walmart and get Total Beats blood pressure support soft chews today.
Sponsored by Dr. Marty Nature's Blend, the health of fresh food with the convenience of kibble. Visit drmartypets.com/TV.
My colleague Khan, vacationing in Australia, sent me a video. It is a strange animal. Khan said it looked like a dinosaur. Well, it's actually a goose. It's known as a Cape Barren goose. The bird is native to southern Australia. It is known for its pig-like grunts. People have called the bird pig goose. And we had expected to bring you information today about a life-changing Parkinson's treatment, but President Trump surprised us with that news conference earlier, so we're going to have that report on Parkinson's for you next week. The Chris Salcedo Show is up next. Have a great weekend.